welcome everyone. Great to have you with us. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And we are going to be talking about, in our executive webinar today, leadership strategies and how to build a positive workplace culture. So just really quick, my name is Brendan Shields. I am our lead producer as well as our platform manager here at Dale Carnegie. We're going to have some opportunities for interaction as we go. We're going to have a few polls and some opportunities to ask questions during a Q&A at the end here. So be ready for that. But mostly, just during the first half hour, we're going to be going through our presentation here. So the past year has been a challenge, right? Organizations, teams, and individuals have been pushed to the limits by this global health crisis. And as a result, stress and worry have been compounded by the rapid rate of change, right? So organizations now have an opportunity to confront these changes and in turn better equip the people who stepped up in the crisis and build a workplace culture that's resilient and engaged. So as the pandemic is waning and the economy is growing again, only the most proactive organizations are going to attract, retain, and grow talent and level up their organizational resilience. So we're really looking forward to talking about this today. I have the honor of working alongside my friend and colleague, Joe Hart, who is the president and CEO of Dale Carnegie. So Joe, I will hand the reins over to you and looking forward to our topic.
Awesome, Brendan. Thank you so much. It's great to be back with you again, and it's an honor to be with everyone. Brendan, just a quick technical thing. I don't know how to turn my camera on here since there's no thing on here, so if you want to do that.
Yeah, sure. Let me just turn that back on quick. And go ahead and get started, Joe. I'll have that on in just a moment here.
Okay, sounds good. Well, again, I'm honored to be with everyone. I think as Brendan had said, we're going through clearly incredible times and times of massive change within our businesses. And from a cultural standpoint, these times are absolutely pivotal. So part of what we're going to do today, we're going to do this in a very rapid way. We're going to spend 30 minutes going through insights from our Dale Carnegie organization from around the world, proven strategies that we've seen to build strong cultures. Dale Carnegie has 200 operations in 86 countries, so we see an awful lot, and we're going to share those insights with you right now. Let's start with some of the challenges that we as leaders are facing. Clearly, as we look back over the last year, we know that many employees aren't feeling valued. Some have been on the front line, some have been working, taking 2 or 3 roles on as organizations are furloughed or laid people off. Stress and burnout are significant. Right now, we're talking about kind of a re-entry into a full workplace, and that creates different choices for leaders about how to handle that. A lot of uncertainty still for employees leads them to want to seek more information. And there's still a lot of uncertainty in the world as well, which makes employees and can make employees feel at risk. So the outcome in terms of how this impacts culture, particularly as it relates to leadership, trust can be damaged. And where there's a lack of information, rumors and gossip ferment. There's fear and so forth. So we're going to talk about some specific strategies to address these kinds of things. The 4 specific strategies start with, number 1, leadership blind spots. What are the things that we as leaders may not see that have a potential negative impact on our organizations, our cultures, on our retention? And how do we improve those? How can we be transparent with others and to build stronger trust? Trust is the foundation, clearly, of all good relationships. How do we create psychological safety where people are willing to be agile and to take risks and to be bold versus being fearful? And how do we develop resilience? Clearly, something that's been so important over this past year is the ability to move forward with confidence. And we know that that will be an important trait moving forward as well. We're going to start with a poll and really going to ask you, how do you feel that remote work over the past year has impacted your organization's culture? Is it stronger? Is it the same? Is it worse than it was before? So Brendan, I'm going to turn this over to you to open up the poll. Okay, you should all have a
And my mistake, Joe. I was on mute there, but the poll is open on the right-hand side of the screen. So just go ahead and click on one of the responses there. We have about another 30 seconds to take the poll. And Joe, if you were looking for it, the start video button should be at the bottom of your screen. You should see it directly to the right of the mute button.
Okay, I see it now. This is what we might call a proverbial user error. Thank you for pointing that out. We're back online. Good to see you, everybody, at least to be seen. And on this question, this is interesting because some companies and organizations have said, hey, our culture has gotten stronger. We've been connected in ways that we haven't been before. Others, it's been more harmful, not seeing people the way that we have in the past. So really looking forward to seeing what the results of this poll are here. So Brendan, do we have those?
Yep, we're just waiting. We've got another 10 seconds or so, and then we're going to go ahead and put those results up on the screen so we can take a look together.
Okay.
But it looks like we've got a pretty even spread here. So let's go ahead and take a look. You should be seeing those up on the screen now.
Okay, so we've got, yeah, it does look like an even split. So about the same number has said that it hurts corporate culture as much as it's the same, or as it's gotten stronger. So let's focus on this presentation about how we make our corporate culture stronger, number of strategies that we can use to do that. The first one we're going to talk about is really around blind spots. And it was about 2 years ago. I was driving down the road. It was a north-south, 2 lanes each way. I'm in the left lane going north. Need to get over, put my signal on, look in the mirror, don't see anything. All of a sudden, you hear the horn. I hit somebody. Thankfully, there was no significant damage. But this happens to us on the road, and it happens to us in life, right? And leadership blind spots really refer to those specific behaviors that we may have that we're not aware of that can demotivate other people or keep them from giving their best efforts. We had done a survey, multiple countries, thousands of people around the world, and we asked, what are the things that when you see them from your supervisors, these are things that inspire you to want to give your best work. And you can see from the left to the right, the top answer is respecting my opinion. People want to be respected, appreciated, listened to, etc. We then asked, well, how often do you see these behaviors from your supervisors? And you can see the numbers that have kind of layered in here, 58% around respects opinion and 49% sincere appreciation. So what we have here, though, are gaps. And those gaps reflect the biggest blind spots that we saw in our survey. So number one, 41% is the delta between what they'd like to see and what they do see when a supervisor fails to admit that he or she is wrong, or 36% around giving sincere appreciation, or 35% around truly listening. So being able to identify what some of these common areas are might give us some insights in terms of ourselves, or maybe one of the other things that are here would. One of the people I think who does a really good job of admitting when he is wrong is Warren Buffett. He had made an investment in 2014 in a company called Tesco. It was a company that was a British supermarket chain. They were involved in a major scandal. People were telling him, sell your shares and get out of this. He dawdled, by his own admission, and lost quite a bit of money. But he was someone who'd say, look, I made a mistake. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to own this mistake. And clearly, when we are working with others, this is something, if we make a mistake, other people often see it. The question is, how do we respond to it? And by being able to say, look, I made the mistake. Here's what I've learned. Here's what we're going to do to move forward. Is a perfect example of what can build trust and relationship with the people with whom we work. If we think about listening and the appreciation, there's this great quote from Teddy Roosevelt, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so often, we think we are appreciative or listening and caring. We might logically point to a number of times where I've listened to so-and-so. But as Dale Carnegie said, remember, we're not dealing with creatures of logic, we're dealing with creatures of emotion. So it's really important to understand, well, how do people feel? And what is their assessment? What is their assessment? Not what do I think about what I've done, but how do other people view me? So there are a couple of different ways that we can find our blind spots. And if the only thing you took away from this webinar is this point, hopefully this would be worthwhile by itself. Number one is trying to think about people who model very effectively some of those most important attributes that people want to see for engagement: listening, appreciation, admitting when they're wrong, and so forth. Who are some of those people? What are some of the ways that they model those? What does that look like? And then also, either by ourselves reflecting on how do I do against that objectively, or asking someone. It's amazing that sometimes we're reluctant to ask for feedback. We might be afraid of what we hear, and yet feedback can be a gift. Feedback can be something that can truly help us sharpen our saw, get better, be more effective, and to grow. So asking other people for feedback can be a great way to identify some of those blind spots. And that's really kind of the approach that we're recommending, is having that model, asking for feedback, looking for gaps, and then working toward improvement. A second strategy is really around transparency and being transparent as a way to build trust. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. There was a major US airline that wanted to deploy an AI system around its ticketing system. And at the time, they were using manual systems and people who were doing all that work. Now, rather than telling those people what they wanted to do, they concealed it. And they came up with reasons to explain, well, we want to understand what processes you're going through just so we can document that for new hires. They basically weren't truthful. And as you can imagine, when that came out, what that did to trust. Transparency and how we communicate and what we communicate is absolutely a core driver around culture. MIT looked at companies that were successful in driving engagement during the pandemic. And what they found was that those companies that were the most successful were very effective with their top team communication, transparency of leaders. All of this is around being open. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we say everything, or that you have all the answers, but you do say what you can say. And if you don't have an answer, say, I don't have an answer. We'll get back to you when we do. But that kind of transparency can definitely build trust. We saw this in an additional study too. Again, the organizations that do this well are great at driving culture, and the organizations that do this poorly, these are drivers that really undermine that culture. Going back to what I was saying a second ago about emotion and perception, there's a great quote: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We think, certainly I have thought at times, well, I've communicated, I've said this, or I said this in this way. The question is whether or not it was heard or adopted, and so forth. So communication, being this two-way process, really involves trying to be introspective about how we communicate, and also thinking about our audience and what they need to hear and how they need to hear it, and really communicating that way. So transparency, if I am, in Dale Carnegie, we talk about principle 17, trying honestly to see things from the other person's point of view, really putting ourselves in that position of the audience and making sure that we're communicating effectively. Another factor that goes to trust is what we call internal and external reliability. This is data that came from 14 countries that we surveyed thousands of people. And we said, what is that one driver that really causes you to want to trust someone? And their reliability was the number one thing that came up. Reliable leadership, external reliability, if we talk about that, really goes to, am I honest with other people? Do I do the things that I say that I'm going to do? Am I consistent? Can people count on me? Internal reliability goes to, am I true to myself? Am I being authentic? Can people really rely on me to be who I am and to adhere to my values? And a person who does a great job of this was the former leader of Pepsi, Indra Nooyi. She was someone who said, look, I am who I am. I am not American. I'm a woman who's leading this company, and I'm going to stand by my values. And she did. She talked about really wanting to steer Pepsi in a direction of going down healthier food options. She maintained that path, even in light of very significant opposition. But ultimately, by being true to herself and by being true to the things that she said she was going to do, created great value in Pepsi over a period of time. One of the great leaders of Pepsi's history. So we're going to go into another poll, because this also goes to this reliability. How well has your organization lived its values during these difficult times? So Brendan, you want to go ahead and cue this poll up, please?
Yes, getting that up on the screen right now for you. One moment. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this poll here. So it should be showing up on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, we'll have a minute to take this.
Yeah, so let's go through these options then too, right? So how well has your organization lived its values? Very well. I mean, so if we think about the past year, have the decisions been clearly made based on the values that we've said, the values that we put on our walls and that we say that we stand for? Have we done a pretty good job? Or maybe not so well. Some decisions seem like they contradict values that we've said we stand for, or I don't know. So again, it'll be interesting to see how everyone here fares on this.
Well, I'm happy to say, before we close the poll out here, it looks like we're at least trending pretty positively here. Most people are in the pretty well category, so we're going to go ahead and take just a few seconds to finish up here. And we're going to go ahead and close the poll now. We'll give you about 15 more seconds to add your response if you haven't done so already, and then we'll take a look at the results.
Yeah, let us know, Brendan. We're looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let me go ahead and get those up on the screen for you. Here we go. Let's take a look.
So it looks like the vast majority of people were pretty well or very well. So that's good. It's a good sign. Number of no answers, but that's good. I mean, this has been a time really for us as leaders, for all of us as leaders, to hopefully stand up for what we've said that we believe in, and to demonstrate integrity. It looks like a lot of organizations have done a good job with that. So Dale Carnegie had said there's 4 ways and only 4 ways in which we have contact with the world. And just to think about this, because this is how people evaluate us when we think about building trust, what we do, how we look, what we say, and how we do it. And so some tips for building trust through reliable leadership. I've talked about a number already. There might be a number of things here that jump out to you. The number one that I like to highlight is number 2, showing empathy, because really this is about relationship and really trying to see things from the other person's point of view. And some of the other things here go to that: being a good listener, communicating regularly, etc. These are things that really can help us build effective trusting relationships. The third thing is psychological safety. And one of the, I believe, greatest leaders of our time is Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Boeing and Ford. He came into Ford in 2006 at a time that the company was very close to going into bankruptcy. He inherited a culture that was very toxic. People were often undermining each other, not being very, very transparent and open. He ultimately said, look, the only way that we're going to be successful is if we work together as one team, one Ford. We have to be honest with each other. He really worked to create a culture where people could say the business was red, yellow, or green and not worry about recrimination. It was really about trying to come together and to work together. And he turned that entire business around in a very short period of time, from multi-billion-dollar losses to multi-billion-dollar gains. And he did it again by creating a place where people were willing to be open, transparent, and to take risks. So how do we do that? How do we create psychological safety? What we're talking about is a place where people are not worried necessarily about how they look. They're not worried about seeing in a bad light. If they say something and make a mistake, they're not going to get jumped on and so forth. That they're encouraged to take risks. And in fact, Google did a multi-year study called Project Aristotle. They looked at what are the drivers for the highest performing teams. And there's all kinds of things that they had thought. Their hypotheses were around education or school or a whole range of things. But what they found was that the number one driver for high performance in teams was psychological safety. And the question then partly is, how do we drive that? So we're going to get to that in a moment. Before we do, we're going to do a quick poll, because this is one of the most important things we want to assess. Brendan, I'm going to ask you to pull up the poll and get that going. You can look at this at work. Have you ever been hesitant to tell the boss there's a problem? Been worried that asking for help might reflect badly on you? Observed people trying to make others look bad, feeling like an outsider, or working in environments where mistakes are talked about as personal failures?
All right, so we are just going to take a shorter amount of time this time. And go ahead and select your response here.
It's interesting. Not too long ago, right before the pandemic, I was in Japan and I was talking to the CEO of a very, very successful company. He said, we've got some of the most brilliant engineers in Japan in our company. And the biggest problem I have is really getting them to feel comfortable being open and sharing their opinion. They were concerned about if they made a mistake or they said something wrong, how it would affect them in their career. So this issue of psychological safety and the cultures that we have is a very important one. So it looks like a lot of people have said yes. These are things that we have seen and experienced in our own work and our own culture. I think I see on every single one here, there's a decent number of people who've said yes. So something to think about as we go back to our organizations is in what ways can we start to create psychological safety, and what are the benefits of psychological safety in our organizations? Clearly, where people are comfortable sharing their opinion, they're comfortable taking risks. We have better collaboration, more creativity, and agility. And if we think even over the past year, our organizations have all had to pivot. We've had to move very quickly in the midst of just unprecedented impact. So if we have one culture where people are afraid to take risk, afraid to move, we can see how that would affect the entire organization versus others that are prepared to change entirely their business model or the platform or whatever they need to do. There are a number of things that we can do to create psychological safety in our teams. And I often say, look, this is not about confronting the facts or the challenges. We have to do that. What it is about how we do that. So showing respect for the other person's opinion, never saying you're wrong. It doesn't mean the person's not wrong. It might be that we might approach that in a certain way, the way that we say it. We're not going to say, hey, that's a dumb idea, or we've tried that before, it's never going to work. But you might say, well, that's something to think about. What would happen if we did this instead, or if we did this? Or if we're wrong, as we said earlier, admit it and and that's okay. What did you learn from that if you made a mistake? Calling attention to people's mistakes indirectly and so forth. So maybe there's some things here, but we want to create an environment where people are comfortable, they're not worried, they're not scared. Now, if there are performance issues or something over a period of time, that's a different issue. We're all as leaders accountable for driving results. And we can do that still while creating a psychologically safe workplace. Many companies have done that very, very successfully, including the example of Ford as well as Google. The fourth strategy, on 9/11, there was a company called Sandler O'Neill on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. That day, they lost about a third of their people. They lost nearly 2/3 of their management team. All of their records mostly were destroyed. The next day, the surviving members of the management committee, led by Jimmy Dunn, came together and they just assessed the situation. And they made a decision. Notwithstanding the grief and all that they were suffering, they said, this firm, we have to survive. We have to do that to show terrorists that they can't win. And we have to make sure that we're taking care of our people. We need to assess the impact on our families and make sure that we're supporting them. We need to make sure that our clients understand that we're going to take care of them and so forth. So they rose from that horrible period of time with a conviction and with a determination that is as grievous as that situation was, they were going to be successful. Within a week, they had already relocated to temporary offices. Within 2 weeks, they had hired 13 people and they already regained profitability. By January, they had permanent offices. They were at pre-9/11 profitability. So as a firm, they were able to come out of that horrible situation and to survive and ultimately thrive. And part of their conviction was, we need to make sure that we're taking care of our people and the survivors. So when we think about just an awful experience like that, we might look and say, how could they have been so resilient? What was it about them that enabled them to bounce back amidst the very worst things that could possibly happen? That's what resilience is. Resilience is the ability to deal with adversity, small or large, and to be able to cope and recover and to learn and move forward in a positive way. If you look at this chart from the top left, we'll see sometimes when adversity occurs, people are very quickly dysfunctional and they stay dysfunctional over time. That's chronic. If we see the second line, which is the purple line, this is where someone is initially dysfunctional, but over time they recover. The third line down is where someone might not immediately respond in a dysfunctional way, but over time, things get worse and worse and worse, and they build themselves up into a frenzy, if you will. Where we want to be is this lower line. This line where no matter what happens, we're able to address that adversity and to function and to be successful throughout it and to know that we're going to be okay. And the two drivers of resilience, the two biggest drivers based on our research, are positivity and confidence. People who are consistently positive are much more likely to be resilient, and people who have confidence in themselves are much more likely to have to be resilient as well. And these are things that we can decide based upon what we think. One of the most important quotes I've ever heard in my life came from Dale Carnegie. And he says that the most important lesson I ever learned is the importance of what we think. If I knew what you think, I'd know what you are, because our mental thoughts are our thoughts make us what we are. Our mental attitude is the X factor that determines our fate. And isn't that true? Two people in the exact same situation, facing the same facts, one person thrives, another person is miserable. So how we choose to see something, our confidence and our perspective are critical relative to our resilience. Fear is a liar. False evidence appearing real. Often we will allow ourselves to fall into this mindset of helplessness. And the first thing that we need to do when we're positive and we're confident, then we can overcome that fear and we can be resilient and can thrive. And clearly, if we look back over the past year, hopefully we can look back at that and with pride about the courage that all of us brought over just a harrowing situation. So how do we develop resilience with confidence and positivity? And I like to say first, you can't give what you don't have. Right? So first of all, we've got to be resilient ourselves, living in day-tight compartments. What this simply means doesn't mean I'm not going to think about tomorrow or plan for tomorrow. What it means is I am not going to worry about tomorrow. I may be concerned about a presentation that I have, but I'm going to focus on what I can do today. Day-tight compartments are like those airtight compartments in a submarine where water can't get in either way. So we're going to basically focus on what we need to focus on today. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can possibly happen? And then build back from that, because almost always the worst doesn't happen. We can build on that and make it better. And then filling our minds with thoughts of peace, courage, health, and hope. Making sure that we are remaining positive, that we're focused on the positive things, that we're looking at what is working well as things that might be challenging us. Once we have that resilience as leaders, then we can give that to other people. And frankly, our people need that from us. Our people look to us for leadership, and we can't expect them to be resilient if we're not ourselves as leaders. So we would want to model and encourage that positive attitude and then work with them to support them. From a servant mindset, how do we help somebody else? How do we strengthen someone else? When we can do that, then we can win together, we can thrive together, we can be successful together. So Dale Carnegie said, develop success from failures. Discouragement and failure are two of the surest stepping stones to success. So if we allow our minds to see that, if we're willing to frame it that way, then we can build success from what appears to be failure. So to summarize those 4 strategies, what are the things that we can do to build those positive cultures in our organization? One is working on our own blind spots. And again, none of us are perfect. And sometimes I'll say to people, look, I'm not perfect. If there's one thing I could do better in this area, what would it be? It's okay. We shouldn't expect to be perfect. So how do we work on our own, finding those blind spots and improving them? Building trust, being transparent, really being mindful. Sometimes we judge ourselves based on what we think. Other people judge us based on what we see. So making sure that we're being true to ourselves and true to others. Creating and protecting psychological safety, creating an environment where it's okay to take risk, where we encourage people to do that. And if something doesn't work, we say, what did we learn and how do we move forward? And then developing resilience, both in ourselves and in our people. And that can start by focusing on what we think and how we think and making sure that we're focused on what's going well, in addition to the things that we might have to focus on improving. The time that we're in right now is an amazing one. I mean, thankfully, we're looking at the world right now with optimism and hope and confidence moving forward. We are going to get through all of this. We've got much brighter days ahead. And frankly, as leaders, which each one of us are, this is our opportunity. It's our time to rise and to help build courage and to build a positive future for ourselves, our people, and our organizations. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I've also included some information here. If you want more information, much of the white papers that I spoke of and some of the research you can find at dalecarnegie.com. We also have a podcast where you can listen to some incredible leaders from around the world share their insights about leadership and things that they've learned to advance in their careers. And then also I share information frequently on LinkedIn and Twitter. So, Brendan, I'll turn it over to you to say who's got the first question.
Perfect. All right. Well, we can add those questions in the chat, which you're going to find on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So please keep those coming in the chat. Joe, I'm just going to get started with one I found on my team where, especially working remotely, myself or other members of my team can be a little bit afraid of making a mistake, perhaps, or trying new things because they fear they might be reprimanded if things don't go exactly as planned. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, Brendan, it's I guess two things. One is it's a hard thing to do if we don't have support from the leaders, right? So which is one of the reasons why I'm encouraging leaders to encourage others to create that space where you can do that. But I think even in a case where a leader might not necessarily have that mindset, still you can take the risk and take the chance. If something doesn't work out, to explain it from that leader's standpoint and say, look, what I was trying to do was this, trying to create value for the organization, trying to do A, B, and C. It didn't work. Here's what I've learned. Here's what we're going to do move forward. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. So I think, Brendan, it's something that really all of us can take command around, so to speak, is trying to create the environments that we want to have. And again, speaking to all of the leaders on this webinar, we can create those environments and encourage people to take chances.
Sure. I think that's a great response. I think it's also important to just reward taking chances. You know, when it works out, really make a big deal of it and make sure those team members are appreciated.
By the way, I'm glad you said that. Just to go on that as well, we talked about recognition, and often we want to recognize the kinds of things that we value. So if we do want to create a psychologically safe environment, if Brendan, you go and you try something and it doesn't work. I mean, there's a great story in How to Win Friends about an executive who made a mistake and cost the company money. But what the executive said was, well, you know, you actually did better than we've done in leadership here before. You want to encourage people at least to learn from those experiences and then to recognize what you learned.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. We have another question here from Mariana while we're talking about psychological safety. What are some ways we can actually measure psychological safety within our teams?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's a couple ways to do it. I mean, so one common way is through a survey. And there's different questions you can ask in the survey just about trying to understand where people are. So for example, even the poll that we did before, if we want to get some honest feedback, you can do an anonymous survey of your people that asks them those kinds of things. Have you ever felt this way? Do you feel this way? And so forth. I mean, there's just to get that kind of direct feedback will be one barometer of it. But another thing I think goes to metrics that you might develop. So if it's a organization, and I don't know what taking risk in an organization looks like or what unlocking that is, but setting a metric around that. So for example, let's just say that it's number of new innovations on a product team. You know, so what is the number of innovations in the product team? If it's a low number, then that might be a reflection of psychological safety. You might probe and say, geez, why aren't we getting more feedback? Well, last time I gave someone an idea, they told me it was a dumb idea, so I don't want to give more ideas. So I think there are a number of different ways that we can do that. Those are a couple.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Just to nip this in the bud, we've gotten a few questions about the recordings and slides. We are going to distribute a copy of the recording after the session. We will not be distributing the slides, but hopefully later today or tomorrow, we'll be sending the recording out. Another question here from Kevin. Kevin is talking about how they have a strong commitment to culture, but he's noticed some coworkers are developing this look out for number one kind of mindset instead of truly showing empathy. So do you have any advice on how to hire and manage for culture so that we can move in the right direction together?
It's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with Dr. Stephen Klasko, who's the CEO of a 18 chain health system in Philadelphia. And I asked him basically that question because he was talking about trying to create a culture. And he said, number one, it starts with values. Basically being clear about what the values of the organization are, and trying to hire for those values and asking questions around those values. So if the goal is to have a organization that is supporting each other, trying to understand and to ask questions about that even in the hiring process. But then throughout that, as an organization, rewarding, as Brendan was saying earlier, rewarding people and recognizing people who do that. Even, at Dale Carnegie, we create awards for people who will be selfless, who will do something to help someone in the field or help a customer or whatever it might be. So we want to call that out and to celebrate it. So to have it as a clear value, to speak about it frequently as leaders, to add that into the hiring process and saying we're looking for people and actually making that clear, we work as one team. This is about, putting others first and bringing out the best in others as a leader. And basically it's been very transparent about that.
Thank you. Boy, I can relate to this one. I don't have a first name on the question, unfortunately, but the question is, my government agency has pretty much reinvented the way we provide services during the last year and a half. While these changes have helped, staff have experienced a change fatigue. What can we do to be responsive, but keep the change to a minimum over time?
So change fatigue is a real issue, and especially over the past year, probably not just for your organization, but for many of us who are in this. And I'd say a couple things. Number one is an organization to be aware of the change. I mean, we will often talk about, and sometimes there's a disconnect between the way leaders think and then what is actually happening, throughout the organization. A leader might think, well, this is simple. I just said this, we're going to do this, without really thinking through what the impact is. And so really part of an effective change management strategy is to really to take time to involve people throughout the organization to assess what needs to happen, what the impact on people is, and then to really take that into consideration. Because what happens is, if we simply change without taking a step back to look at the impact on the people, it can just burn people out. And clearly that's not good for anybody. So from a leadership standpoint, it sounds like the organization that we're asked about, it might be worthwhile. And then how could someone even go to a leader with this? Because sometimes one of the common questions I get is, look, what do you do if you're not a leader? What if you do if I'm in the organization, how do I communicate this to leadership? And the thing I'll often say is, and I'll say this as a leader, sometimes going back to blind spots, let's just assume people may not be aware of the problem. Maybe they've missed it. Maybe they don't understand. So being able to bring that up in an effective way, which is, hey, I know that you love this organization, you care about this organization, you love our customers and our team members. One thing I wanted to share with you that we're having as a challenge is blank, but talking about it in terms of the leader's interests and the organization's interests and the thing that the leader cares about can be a way to bridge that gap between someone who says, look, I don't drive decisions on this. I'm just, within the organization. And, how do I talk to a leader about it?
Great. Thank you, Joe. I think we just have time for one more question. We might try to get to two if we have time here. Question from Mark. If the leader claims to have an open door but doesn't welcome any input, what's a safe way to have an authentic conversation with this type of leader?
I think the same thing would be true in terms of what I just said, which is, let's just say it's Brendan. Brendan, I really appreciate that you have always said you have an open door and that you want to hear from your team members because that's important to you and you care about us, right? One of the things I want to do is to make sure that I'm giving you honest feedback because I want to make sure that I know you want it, and here, let me share what it is. And I mean, not to put the person on the defensive, not to be assumptive in a negative way, to assume positive intent, but still to be able to address it in a non-defensive way, but to address it directly.
Great. Good answer. Thank you. Do you have time for one more, Joe?
I've got time for one more. I just want to be sensitive to everyone else's time.
Perfect. We know it is just about the time we said we'd wrap up, but let's take one more question here. We've got one from Connie. And Connie works with organizations with a series of focus groups where they collect candid feedback from participants. And what Connie's noticed is that often the team members participating are providing a totally different view of how top leadership or upper management views the culture. Do you have any advice to help leaders learn from that sort of feedback?
Yeah, I do. And again, I like to assume, as I said, positive intent, and that maybe there's a disconnect. Sometimes, speaking as someone who is a leader and leads a large organization, there are things that I just don't know, or things that I might assume to be true that aren't. So, and I think that's true. If I talk, as I talk to CEOs around the world, that's one of the things that they say. So, to be able to, and frankly, as a CEO, I view that as gold to learn some of those things and to bridge those gaps. And I think other CEOs and executives do as well. Hopefully they do. So what I would encourage is just to be transparent. Again, to do it in positive and constructive and non-defensive way, not putting someone in the defensive, not casting blame, not saying you're wrong, but just really how do you help someone see something? And frankly, I would expect, hopefully they'll be grateful. It may be a tough pill to swallow, depending on what it is. But I think most people hopefully would appreciate the feedback.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe, and everyone for your time today over the past 40 minutes. We really do appreciate it. Joe, not sure if you have time for additional questions. We did have a couple we didn't get to here, but we do respect your time. So if you do have to go, feel free. As we said before, we will be sharing a copy of the recording of this hopefully later today, if not tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay safe out there. And Joe, up to you if you've got time. We've got a couple more
I can
questions.
take. I think anyone who wants to stay, if there's more questions, I'm happy to stay for a couple more.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got one from Candace. Candace's organization has some stringent COVID protocols. Unfortunately, not all departments are, and sorry, that scrolled up for a second. All departments are not holding their employees accountable to following these protocols. So that's creating some issues, obviously. Any suggestions in that scenario?
Again, these are definitely tough and tricky issues because they involve. I mean, part of the question is, why aren't all of the departments following the protocols? And I guess the first thing I might question is, number one, does everyone understand what the protocols are? And assuming that, I mean, because we might assume that they do, and maybe they do, but let's first say, does everyone know what the protocols are? And then the next question is there a reason that are people aware that the protocols aren't being followed? I mean, maybe is it possible that maybe the department doesn't realize it? If they do realize it, then the question is, okay, well, just trying to understand, are these protocols for everybody or just are these optional? And maybe it's just to have, some sort of dialogue within the organization. If someone says that they're optional, I mean, part of my question is, why do we even have these protocols? If they're here for the safety and the health and the welfare of all of us, then is there a reason that these wouldn't be followed? But I do think it really is around, again, at least at first, trying to assume positive intent, trying to make sure that we're not, assuming the worst and so forth, trying to get the facts that we can. And then trying to put things, at least in terms of other people's interests, because I can't imagine that there's any leader in an organization who doesn't care about the health of their people. I mean, it would be reckless. So hopefully, when these things are brought up in a constructive way, people will be receptive to them. And I guess if they're not, then that's a whole other issue.
All right, just a couple more questions here before we wrap up. One from Melissa. Would you consider it more effective to address the team as a group or more face-to-face? I'm guessing she meant one-on-one to encourage trust.
So I'd say two things. It depends on both. So it depends on what the situation is. And there are times certainly that some situations need to be addressed as a group and some need to be addressed one-on-one. Certainly if there's a challenge, if someone has, done something and I don't want to embarrass that person in front of others, I might talk to that person one-on-one just to try to understand, hey, are you aware of this? Did you do this? And so forth. But I personally, I will have one-on-one meetings with people, and I think those are really important opportunities to get to know them, and to care about them and to ask about what's happening in their lives. And I think is a really important time for one-on-one kind of meetings. And then, of course, we have to work together. We want to work together as an effective team, as a high-performing team. So then, what are the norms and the standards that we have as a team, and making sure that there's transparency. One thing I would say that you should never do is say one thing to someone and then a different thing to somebody else, because that will completely undermine trust. So having that internal integrity, being consistent, following those norms and the protocols, but working one-on-one to build trust, and working also to build team trust.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. I know one thing we hear a lot is, praise publicly, reprimand privately. And while, you're trying to avoid reprimanding as much as you can, when you're having those private conversations, I think that's the time to maybe address opportunities for improvement rather in front of a whole group, because that can be embarrassing, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. The one caveat I would put to that, but again, I agree with you 100%, is that sometimes you can say almost anything if we say it in the right way. And I think in a caring way, in an empathetic way. I mean, so even in a group setting, if someone has made a mistake, without really singling that person out, or just saying, hey, look, one of the things that might not be working here is X. How do we improve? How can we come together and improve this? Al Mullally did a fabulous job of doing that at Ford, where someone raised a hand and said, look, I made a mistake. Or I guess he didn't necessarily point it out, but he encouraged that person to step up and to do that. And that's all right. Great. Brendan, how do we help Brendan? How do we come together? Who can help Brendan? You know what I mean? Brendan, how can I help you? So, I think if the person feels comfortable, if there's trust, I've said, my wife can say anything to me because I trust her, and I think that's true even in a group setting if it's said the right way. If there's an underlying team trust.
Exactly. I think that trust has to be there. That has to be the foundation. I believe we've just got time for one more question here from Elena, who asks if you have any advice for someone joining a new organization. How do you assess the company culture during the interview process?
Well, one of the things I did when I joined Dale Carnegie about 6 years ago is I just spent an awful lot of time listening. And I think it's often true of other organizations I've joined, which is, really just trying to get to know people, get to know process, ask questions, write a lot of things down, take a lot of notes. But I mean, from my standpoint, when I came into Dale Carnegie, and I know many times people will come in with a point of view, and that's important, and they'll come in with an idea of things that they want to do, and that's important. Sometimes those things are wrong. Sometimes we really just need to learn and to listen. And so that would be, I think, part of my encouragement is to ask questions about the values, about how things are done, about what's important and so forth. And how can I contribute? What are the things I could do to really make a difference here? I really care about this organization. I want to do well, and ask those kinds of questions.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you again, Joe, for your time and wisdom today. We really appreciate it. And thank all of you for taking the time to join us over the past 45 minutes. We hope this was useful. Again, we will be distributing the recording either later today or tomorrow. And if you do have any questions or concerns, just let me know in the chat. I'd be happy to help. To end the session, all you have to do is exit out this window. And again, hope you have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the upcoming weekends, and please stay safe out there. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Brendan.
My pleasure.